Elias Thompson, a 37-year-old black millionaire, stepped off his private jet, exhaustion etched into his sharp features. Dressed in tailored charcoal slacks, a crisp white dress shirt, and a loosened silk tie, he carried the weight of an overseas business trip that had stretched 3 weeks too long. He hadn't told anyone he was returning to his sprawling Atlanta estate. No grand welcome, no fuss, just silence and the promise of seeing his 2-year-old twin sons, Ezra and Elijah. They were his anchor, his entire world since their mother, Celine, died during childbirth. Only his business manager, a wiry man named Paul, knew he'd been in Dubai, finalizing a deal that would expand his tech empire further. But Elias didn't care about the billions today. He just wanted his boys. The iron gates of his estate creaked softly as he punched in the code, the humid Georgia air clinging to his skin. The courtyard, lined with manicured hedges and marble statues, shimmered under the late afternoon sun. He crossed it, his polished leather loafers clicking against the stone, when a sound stopped him dead, high-pitched giggles, wild and unrestrained. His eyes narrowed, scanning the scene ahead. There, on the tiled patio, sat a large blue plastic basin, the kind used for washing cars or soaking laundry. Inside it, his twin sons, Ezra and Elijah, were stark naked, their brown skin glistening with water, their tiny hands splashing each other as they shrieked with joy. A green garden hose lay coiled nearby, its nozzle dripping onto the tiles. Crouched beside the basin was Ingrid, the live-in maid, a white woman in her late 40s with blonde hair pulled into a messy bun. Her beige uniform was soaked, the sleeves rolled up to her elbows, and her face glowed with a soft smile as she aimed the hose gently over Elijah's head. The boy squealed, clapping his hands, while Ezra, ever the instigator, scooped water and flung it at his brother, sparking another round of laughter. Ingrid chuckled, her voice warm, like this was just another carefree afternoon. But to Elias it was anything but. His jaw tightened, his fists curling at his sides. This wasn't right. His sons, bathed outside like stray dogs. On the patio of his $12 million estate. He stepped forward, his shoes echoing sharply against the wet tiles, each step heavier than the last. Ingrid, he said, his voice low but slicing through the air like a blade. Ingrid flinched, her head snapping up. The hose slipped from her hand, landing with a soft thud on the tiles. "Mr. Thompson," she stammered, scrambling to her feet, water dripping from her apron. "I didn't know you were. What are you doing?" Elias cut her off, his voice tight, barely containing the storm brewing inside him. Ingrid's eyes darted between him and the boys, who were still giggling, oblivious to the tension. "They were playing in the garden, sir, got covered in mud. The water was off in the upstairs bathroom, just for a moment, a plumbing issue. So I thought, you thought dragging them outside and hosing them down like animals was the solution?" His words were sharp, venomous. Elijah flinched at the raised voice, his little shoulders hunching. Ezra, sensing the shift, stopped splashing and looked at his brother, then at his father. Ingrid's face paled, her hands trembling slightly. "No, no, not like that. They love the water. I didn't mean, you're bathing my sons like dogs on patio tile," Elias snapped, his voice rising now, echoing off the stone pillars that framed the courtyard. The twins went quiet, their wide eyes fixed on him. Ingrid's lips quivered, tears welling in her blue eyes. "I would never hurt them, sir." "Never," she said, her voice breaking. They were laughing. They were happy. Elias held up a hand, silencing her. "Save it." His gaze dropped to his sons. Ezra was clutching Elijah's hand now, their small bodies still glistening with water, their expressions uncertain but not afraid. He swallowed hard, his throat tight. "Do you think this is how my wife would want them treated?" he asked, his voice quieter but no less sharp. Ingrid took a shaky breath, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "Celine asked me," she paused, as if weighing whether to continue. "She asked me to care for them like a mother would. To raise them with love, not rules. To let them play, to let them be free. She said if something happened to her, you try to raise them behind glass, like fragile things. She didn't want that, Mr. Thompson. She wanted them to laugh, to get muddy, to know they were safe. Elias's lips parted, but no words came. Celine's name, her memory, hit him like a punch to the chest. He stood frozen, his polished exterior cracking under the weight of her words. Ingrid's voice softened further, almost a whisper. They giggle when I fill the basin. They call it water time. They ask for it. I never forced it. I never meant harm. They're boys, and they miss their mother. Elias's eyes shifted to his sons. Ezra was still holding Elijah's hand, their tiny fingers interlocked. Daddy, Elijah said softly, his voice barely audible over the faint drip of the hose. We happy. The words pierced him, sharp and deep. For a moment, the scene before him shifted. It wasn't about the basin or the hose or the tiled patio. It was about two boys, alive and laughing, and a woman who had stepped into a void left by a mother's absence. But his pride, his need for control, burned in his chest. This isn't how things are done, he muttered, more to himself than to Ingrid. I know, she said quietly, her eyes steady despite the tears. But it's how they needed it today. Before Elias could respond, footsteps echoed behind him, hurried and uneven. A young man, one of the estate's junior staff, rushed across the courtyard, his face flushed. Sir, he panted, glancing nervously at the twins and Ingrid. Mr. Gregory called. There's an emergency about the Dubai deal. They need you now. Elias turned his head slowly, tension knotting in his shoulders. His gaze lingered on his sons, on Ezra's mischievous grin as he splashed Elijah again, on Ingrid's quiet resolve. Without a word, he turned and strode toward the house, his shadow disappearing past the stone pillars. The twins' laughter faded behind him, replaced by the hollow echo of his shoes on the marble floor of the mansion's grand foyer. Inside, the house was a mausoleum of wealth, chandeliers dripping with crystal, walls lined with abstract art worth millions, floors so polished they reflected his own distorted face. It was cold, curated, lifeless. Elias's jaw clenched, his chest tight with something he couldn't name, anger, grief, shame. He wanted to scream, to fire everyone, to tear down the pristine walls that mocked him with their perfection. Instead, he kept walking, Mr. Thompson. The voice belonged to Gregory, the estate manager, a balding white man in his 50s, his glasses fogged from rushing through the humid air. He adjusted his tie, catching his breath. Sir, I was told by Paul you'd arrived. Welcome back. But there's a matter, I already know, Elias snapped, his voice like a whip. Gregory froze mid-step. Sir. I saw her, Elias said, stepping closer, his eyes burning. Bathing my children outside like stray animals. Gregory blinked, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. Ah, I see. You see. Elias's voice was dangerously low. And you knew this was happening? Gregory hesitated, his hands fidgeting. Sir, I didn't think you'd approve, but the boys love it. She only does it when the weather's warm. I was going to speak to her, but, don't lie to me, Elias cut in, his tone icy. You thought I knew. Gregory swallowed hard. Ingrid told us she had your late wife's blessing to raise them with freedom. She said. Elias turned away, his back to the man. He couldn't hear Celine's name again, not now, not when the image of his sons in that ridiculous basin was still seared into his mind. He climbed the grand staircase, each step heavier than the last, and entered his bedroom, shutting the mahogany door behind him. For a long time, he stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, staring out at the sprawling estate, acres of perfectly trimmed lawns, a fountain that cost more than most people's homes. His reflection stared back, a stranger in a tailored suit, a man who had built an empire but couldn't face a plastic tub. Celine's memory was everywhere. Her laugh in the kitchen, where she'd dance to old jazz records while cooking. The way she'd roll her eyes when he stayed late at the office. The night she'd placed his hands on her swollen belly, her voice soft but firm. Promise me you'll let them live, Elias. Not just survive, live. He'd promised, his voice thick with love, certain nothing would ever take her from him. And yet, here he was, angry at the sound of his son's laughter, angry at their joy, because it wasn't him giving it to them. A knock broke the silence. Elias turned, his voice flat. Come in. Ingrid stepped inside, her uniform still damp, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. She looked smaller, worn down, but her eyes were steady. I'll leave, she said softly. If that's what you want. Elias didn't respond, his gaze fixed on her. They deserve joy, she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. I wasn't trying to shame you or disrespect this house. I just wanted to keep them happy. That's all I've ever wanted. For the first time, Elias really looked at her, not as the maid, but as the woman who had stayed through sleepless nights, who had wiped tears and changed diapers, who had sung lullabies when Celine's voice could no longer fill the house. Did Celine really ask you to do this? He asked, his voice quieter now. Ingrid nodded, reaching into her apron pocket. She pulled out a folded, yellowed piece of paper, its edges worn from time. She handed it to him, her hands trembling slightly. Elias unfolded it, his breath catching at the sight of Celine's handwriting, elegant and deliberate. If I don't survive, please raise them as if joy were their birthright. Let them splash. Let them sing. Let them grow with dirt under their nails. Elias will try to shelter them, to keep them perfect. Don't let him. Don't let their lives be a museum. His hands shook as he read, tears burning at the corners of his eyes. He blinked them back, his throat so tight he could barely breathe. I'm sorry, he whispered, the words foreign on his tongue. You're not a bad father, Ingrid said gently, her voice steady despite the weight of the moment. You're just scared. So am I. The silence stretched between them, heavy but not oppressive. Elias folded the letter carefully, tucking it into his pocket. Stay, he said, his voice barely audible. Ingrid exhaled, her shoulders relaxing for the first time since he'd arrived. Thank you. That night, Elias walked into the twins' room, the soft glow of a nightlight casting shadows on the walls painted with stars and clouds. Ezra and Elijah were curled up in their cribs, dressed in matching blue pajamas, their hair still slightly damp from the afternoon's chaos. He knelt beside them, his knees pressing into the plush carpet, and kissed their foreheads, lingering longer than usual. I'm home, he whispered, his voice thick. And I'm staying this time. Ezra stirred, his tiny hand twitching in his sleep. Elijah rolled over, a sleepy smile spreading across his face. Outside, the garden hose still dripped faintly, its rhythm a quiet reminder of the day. Inside, something had shifted, something broken had begun to heal.